Our next speaker is Claire Finlayson. And Claire, I think if you're not unmuted yet, you can unmute yourself. I'll just say a few words here. Claire Finlayson lives in Gibson, British Columbia on the beautiful Sunshine Coast. After 25 years, am I online here? Wait a second. Yeah. After a 25-year career working as a jewelry designer, raising a family and running a business, she now writes full-time. She has been an essayist and occasionally a journalist, but her passion is the long-form narrative nonfiction, and her book, Dispatches from Ray's Planet, A Journey Through Autism, is her first book, 7 years in the making. Claire serves as a vice president on the board of directors of the Sunshine Coast Festival of the Written Arts, Canada's longest-running literary event. She has volunteered her services as a writer, editor, and proofreader with the Prison Mathematics Project. While she is in awe of the brilliant mathematical minds convening to celebrate today, Pi Day, and the never-ending number at its heart, her own relationship with pi tends to involve apples, blueberries, and vanilla ice cream. I would like to just interject here. What she doesn't realize is that mathematicians are just as much in awe of writers as the other way around. As a child, Claire's big brother, Ray, was bright and inquisitive, but as the two became teenagers, Ray struggled to acquire the social skills and came more easily to others. Claire tried to help, pointing out that what he should or shouldn't have said or done. Ray insisted that he wasn't the problem on my planet, he would explain. There were no social climbers, no subtle hints or subliminal messages. And Claire vowed then to find Ray's planet. Dispatches from Ray's Planet draws on Ray and Claire's correspondence to tell the story of two siblings from very different planets. In an email exchange a few days ago, I shared with Claire a TED Talk given by Grant Sanderson, creator of a mathematical video YouTube channel called 3 Blue, 1 Brown. She was struck by how he described mathematics in ways that resonated with her as a writer, speaking of wonder, romance, stories that draw you in. He spoke of math as shining light on unexpected connections. Those are all the things those were things that she thought were just exclusively the domain of writers. Well, here she is to talk about her work. And Claire, it's all you're on, so take it away.
Thanks, Peter. Can you hear me okay?
I can.
Well, speaking of shining a light on unexpected connections, you'll already know from my bio or lack thereof that I'm not a mathematician. I am right now a bewildered and bedazzled writer. I'm most certainly the only person in attendance who didn't know why Pi Day is always celebrated on March 14th. It's Christopher Haven's fault that I'm here. When he first asked me to speak at this event, I politely declined. I knew I would be sharing the day with PhD professors, brilliant university students, hardcore math nerds, fellows of the Royal Society, and living legends of the math community. Participating would feel rather like following a series of virtuoso classical musical performances with my rendition of Old MacDonald on recorder. But here I am, so let me explain. My connection with the PMP began with a podcast I heard on the radio here on the west coast of British Columbia, Canada, where I live. In the podcast, Christopher spoke of his metamorphosis from murderer to mathematician, and he ascribed this change to the transformative beauty of math. Like a contagion, the appreciation of this beauty infiltrated his brain and worked its way from there down into his heart, causing strange symptoms, including an unexpected awakening of feelings such as empathy and compassion. In the interview I listened to, he said, and I quote, "I have a heart full of love for what I do." That caught my attention more so than talk of his genius, a word, as you know, he hates when it is applied to him. Martin Luther King Jr. once said, "You've got to change a man's heart before you can change his behavior." And that's what happened here. We all know the story of the genesis of the Prison Mathematics Project, co-founded by Christopher and a precocious 15-year-old Walker Blackwell. We've all heard their appeal for volunteer mentors. Not being part of the math community, I wasn't sure how I could help, but I knew I wanted to. In the podcast, I heard Christopher speak of the universal truths of mathematics. There are no lies involved, he said. It's true or it's not true. I was hearing my brother Ray's mantra almost word for word. As I listened to the radio program, I thought, I should tell Ray about this. He'd be perfect. My book about Ray had just hit the bookstores in Canada 3 months earlier. Growing up, Ray had always insisted that on his planet, there were no treacherous games, no little white lies, no social climbing, no subliminal cues to miss. He just knew that there was a planet out there somewhere where logic prevailed, and that planet was his home. It turns out Ray is autistic, though nobody realized that, including Ray, until he was pushing 50 and we first heard the term Asperger's syndrome. Now, Ray's not sure we need a syndrome to describe people who say what they mean. He embraces the fact that he's an eccentric, and he's happy to leave it at that. Casual banter and chit-chat strike fear into his heart. There are too many opportunities for him to make some unfiltered observation that will blow up in his face. But when the topic is music, or astronomy, or math, he's on solid ground and he shines. In my book, I describe his reverence for mathematics and his patience and dedication as a tutor to struggling high school students. So I'd like to read you his Ode to Mathematics. I took it directly from one of his emails. Math, he says, is the language in which God describes the universe. You can't understand much of anything in science without it. Math can be elegant, even beautiful, in much the same way that music can be. No one owns math and no one rules it. Not even God can make 2 + 2 = 5. Before math, all men are created equal. No one has any authority, and anyone can discover as much of math for himself as he chooses. When you prove a theorem by yourself, you stand as an equal with the first person to have proven it. Pythagoras and I are brothers. The truths of math are absolutely true. They are not subject to dispute or interpretation or revision. In a world of noise and pointless going around in circles, math gives us clarity and certainty. So Ray says mathematical principles make perfect sense. They never trick him, they never change, and they never, ever let him down. There are no exceptions to the rule. He wasn't always a natural with numbers, however. I had forgotten that until I unearthed some of his early work and his report cards from a box of memorabilia brought up from Mom's crawl space. His elementary school arithmetic marks were straight D's. I was floored. I don't remember a Ray who flunked math. I queried him about it by email. Yes, he said, it's true. It's the reason I sympathize with kids. I remember hating math, trying to do it without knowing what I was doing or why or how it really worked. It was in the 7th grade that the light of logic began to dawn. When I awoke, he explains, it was to science first. But then I realized that math was the language of science, and so math bloomed too. This not only makes sense, it is the whole key to my teaching method. Had I been good at arithmetic, I'd never have come to love math, and I'd not be any use as a teacher. I'm a convert, and thus have the love that only a convert can have. Ray has been teaching math ever since to anyone who cares to learn. His method is a complete rethink of the standard curriculum. He's never met a math textbook that didn't deserve a good bashing, and that's always his starting routine. Almost a pre-game warm-up. Look at this, what do they think we are, morons? It energizes him. He keeps threatening to write his own curriculum, but I think he'd miss the fun. So, as my book made its way out into the world, several people who read it also heard Christopher and Walker on the radio and messaged me to suggest that the PMP might be a good fit for my brother. That was all the impetus I needed. I Googled the PMP and fired off an email that said, in effect, boy, have I got a tutor for you. I hadn't exactly asked Ray yet, nor did I understand that the program was seeking mentors for inmates who probably knew more math than he does. But just in case Christopher needed a little extra incentive, I asked my publisher to send him a copy of the book. I wanted him to know that Ray had some cred and a whole lot of heart, even absent a post-secondary education. To my surprise, I received a return email from Christopher himself, warmly welcoming Ray to apply as a mentor. He'd read the book, so he knew that Ray had spent 33 years as a mailman. But that hadn't ruled Ray out. Christopher said our story embodied empathy and inclusivity, qualities he has come to cherish. He said, I feel like you and Ray would be a wonderful and beautiful addition to the PMP. Had I read that wrong? It seemed like he was inviting me in too. But he knew I wasn't a mathematician. Math was a chore that I had to confront now and then, make the numbers balance, make them work, then move on to something I'd rather do. And if I got stuck, I could always just call Ray. As unlikely a fit as I am, something has pulled me in. I'm captivated by the idea that human potential can be nurtured in the most unlikely settings, that confidence and self-worth can be coaxed to life among traumatized people, forced together under unnatural conditions, that a community can form and grow from the roughest of raw materials, and all of it based on my old nemesis, math. I worried I'd oversold Ray, but Christopher reassured me. Some of the speeches and presentations are non-PMP related, he wrote. By the way, that's a huge lie. And I think it would be incredibly fun and appropriate for you to do a reading of the part of your book where Ray is teaching mathematics. Would you consider this? As I told you, I declined. Trust me, I said, I have no business at Pi Day. I'm going to read you his reply. I can't believe you don't see this. I love your book. We're in the same fight together. Your method is writing and mine is numbers. Isn't it just the right time to give the world some inspiration? Yes, the majority of our attendees for Pi Day are MAA folks, but our theme is human flourishing. MAA is all ears, even if mathematics isn't the primary focus of your book. You embody community and inclusivity. Your story is of human interest because it encourages human flourishing. So I won't hear any more talk of you having no business at Pi Day. It's not entirely about math. Again, that's a horrible lie, but there you go. My operating paradigm flipped on its head. It struck me that while I was advocating for inclusivity where it came to neurodivergence, like my brother, here I was making a fuss because Christopher was trying to do the very same thing for me. It seems I was all for inclusivity when I was the includer, but not when I was the includee. So I got over it. So we're going to jump right into the story where I am imploring Ray to help our 15-year-old nephew, Seth, whose family has fallen apart and who is failing grade 9. He and his older brothers had come to live with my husband and me. Unfortunately, I don't have time to show Ray working his magic on all of them. So I'll just tell you about the one in the middle, our nephew, Seth. Seth's attendance at school was sporadic at best, despite all the bribes and incentives I could think up. With only 3 months left in the school year, he was not going to pass his grade. He figured he'd dug himself into a hole he could never hope to climb out of. School staff warned me that he was hanging by a thread. I wanted to find out why he hated school so vehemently and requested a formal psychoeducational evaluation to identify his academic strengths and weaknesses. I braced myself for bad results, but was shocked at just how bad they were. On a bell curve, Seth's math fluency tested in the first percentile, where you would put your point of the pencil down on the paper to begin drawing the curve. I couldn't possibly teach high school math, having last contended with it somewhat unsuccessfully 40 years earlier. But I knew Ray would help. I drove to his place with Seth's abysmal psychoeducational assessment in hand. I found him in his garden. Hey, Ray, would you consider tutoring Seth? His math score is 1%. Look at this report. It says he's profoundly learning disabled. Ray was watering a line of beet seedlings. Seth is not disabled in any way, he said flatly, without bothering to look at the report. Ray had often made dismal prognostications for the boy's future. Nice kid, he'd say, but he'll probably fetch up on the end of a shovel if he doesn't become a drug dealer. Would you at least read this, I asked, following him as he moved to the other side of his garden box. Still, he would not deign to look at the sheaf of papers in my hand, so I read an excerpt out loud. Seth does not intuit mathematical relationships. His overall performance is in the well below average range. He meets the DSM diagnostic criteria for a 315.1 mathematics disorder. I regarded my brother expectantly. There is nothing wrong with Seth's brain. Ray enunciated the words very clearly, as though perhaps I had not heard him the first time. He set his watering can down, straightened up, and brushed his palms together as though to indicate that the subject was now closed. But this was done by a psychologist, I protested. They know what they're doing. That got his attention. Please, he said, don't condescend. They may know what they're doing, but I know what I'm doing too. Let the pundits read their tea leaves. I know better than they do what Seth is capable of. Well, will you come over and help him then? Certainly, any time. How about this afternoon? Spend an hour with him and I'll make you supper. Deal, he said. A bachelor never turns down free food. I went home and broke the news to Seth. Uncle Ray's coming over at 4 to work on your math homework with you. Seth looked pained. At this point, kid, I said, he's probably the only person on the planet who believes in you, so you best be grateful. At precisely the arranged time, Ray wheeled into my driveway on his vintage 10-speed bicycle. He dutifully removed his shoes at the front door and sat down at the kitchen table, so focused on the lesson ahead that he forgot he was still wearing his backpack and his helmet until I gently reminded him. Hi, Uncle Ray, said Seth, smiling sheepishly as he ambled into the kitchen. Hi, kid. Auntie Claire says you're the only person alive who believes in me. Ray's head snapped up. Believe in you? No, I don't believe in you, he said, lingering on the word. You're a lazy teenager and you might very well end up as a drug dealer. Shit, you know what? Even a drug dealer has to know how to do basic math. Oh no, I don't believe in you. But I don't think there's anything wrong with you either. He jabbed at Seth's math textbook. We can knock all this off in a month, tops, but we're going to have to start by backfilling the holes in your knowledge. Math is linear. You can't do grade 9 math on a grade 5 foundation, so we have to get you up to speed. The schools teach math all wrong. It's too slow. It's almost like they're trying to make you hate it. Uh-oh, I thought. Here it comes. Kids these days are not taught how to learn. Ray looked in my direction, indignant. They're taught how to perform like little monkeys. Seth stood leaning against the counter while his uncle trashed the system I was desperately trying to keep him in. I will not teach kids how to pass tests, Ray continued. When I'm finished with a kid, he will pass a test. It's a given. But we gotta go fast, gotta keep the iron hot. He turned to his nephew. By the end of the school year, I want you tutoring other kids. A look of horror blossomed on Seth's face as Ray's diatribe continued. Learning shouldn't be a top-down sort of thing with the teacher as the boss and the student as a sort of employee. His face suddenly brightened. It's like making love, he said. The less you worry about who's supposed to be on top, the more fun you'll have. Then his voice became more reflective. I'm always thrilled the first time a student contradicts me and the first time he or she proves me wrong. I feel like I've given birth to a new person. All right, lad, let's begin. Seth slid into the seat beside his uncle. The learning environment must be free of anything unrelated to math, Ray intoned. Get rid of all this stuff. With both hands, he corralled my African violet, the salt and pepper shaker, and a few other bits and pieces and pushed them roughly away. Our minds must be clear. The table must be clear. Seth scrambled up and caught the salt shaker as it tipped and rolled towards the edge of the table, quickly removing it and the rest of the offending objects. Ray made him wipe the table and fetch the necessary supplies. He barked orders. Ruler, calculator, compass. Seth retrieved these items from a cupboard, and I was dispatched for sharp pencils, paper, and erasers. This became the opening ceremony for entering the sacred realm of mathematics. Ray came every few days. He had agreed to tutor his nephew for no pay other than food, so I was usually in the kitchen while they worked. And by the way, I was taking notes at the kitchen counter. At the start of each session, I made a point of setting the oven timer for an hour. Seth looked balefully at it as the minutes counted down. I would put veggies and dip or a bowl of almonds on the table to tide them over while I made dinner. And they devoured these snacks unthinkingly, Ray's mind on the task at hand, and Seth's on how much longer he had to sit there. Ray's patience was a marvel. When Seth gave a wrong answer, Ray stopped him. What's the first commandment of math? Thou shalt not guess. He went over the problem again and again until Seth got the concept. I found myself getting it too, being drawn in by Ray's exquisite teaching ability as I watched lettuce or stirred a pot of chili. It doesn't matter if the question has 2 digits or 200, Ray told Seth. If you understand the principle, the method is the same. Don't get scared off by big numbers. Seth had by now resigned himself to the fact that he would be attending tutoring sessions with his Uncle Ray most afternoons. He stopped resisting. It wasn't long before he came home with the news that he had passed his math final with 90%. But Ray wasn't finished with him. The more I listened, the more I appreciated his consummate skill as a teacher. He wove together chemistry, biology, astronomy, and physics. He badgered, wheedled, and cajoled, but always the bedrock upon which everything stood was math. I was standing in the kitchen the day Seth forgot when his hour was up, and he forgot that he was learning disabled. Uncle Ray, you know signs on bridges, the ones that say how much weight they can take? How did they figure that out? Seth had asked a question, not because it was going to be on a test, but just because he was curious. I kept on peeling potatoes, but my heart leapt. As for Ray, he was charged with a joyous enthusiasm. Math, of course, came his answer. Math. Bridges are engineered using applied physics, and all physics is just applied math. I had stopped working and was leaning with my back against the counter, entranced. It is impossible not to love math the way my brother teaches it. It was only a matter of time before my African violet would be calculating the surface area of cylinders and the volume of spheres. And a curious thing happened to me as I watched Ray sitting there day after day, teaching that reluctant teenager to speak the language of God. It ceased to matter to me that he is a nice specimen of the disability. I often forgot about his autism. I know he'd be glad to hear that. He was just a man doing something important and altruistic, and I found myself genuinely admiring him. He never once told Seth that he loves him, but he certainly demonstrated that he does. Christopher uses the word beauty a lot when he's rhapsodizing about numbers. I thought he was a little over the top, Ray too. But now that I'm listening, I'm hearing that word a lot from mathematicians and other words like wonder, mystery, and even romance. Okay, you all like numbers. I get it. But there's something else going on here. Author, professor, and mathematical explorer Francis Sue writes of the dignity of human beings and the wonder of mathematical teaching, its humanity, and its power to build virtues that help us all flourish. Honestly, what could functions and fractions and fractals, no matter how elegant, have to do with virtue and dignity. But now I see that mathematics is a language too, and there should be no chasm between numeracy and literacy. After all, a merger of my passion for words and Christopher's passion for numbers is the only reason I'm here. And if there is a chasm between these languages, people like math guru Vanessa, who converses fluently in both, are determined to close that gap, one mind and heart at a time. This intellectual pursuit, writes Professor Sue, can and must be open to all. What astounds me is that Christopher Havens came to the same conclusion sitting alone in a cinder block cell. Christopher, I know you'll at least get a transcript from today, so I want to thank you for inviting me into your community for the day, and to thank you as well for your generosity of spirit in organizing a big bash that you're not allowed to attend. Thank you, mathematicians, for letting me crash your party. I am still terribly intimidated by all of you, but it's been an honor and a joy. Thank you.
That was very moving. Thank you very much, Claire. That's really beautifully spoken. And I would only like to make one comment that, well, at least one comment, that your mention of just being here for the day and letting you crash our party is really not the way to think about it. You're a full member of the community for all days, and I hope you will remain here and make your contributions. I'm reading a very interesting book right now called The Vey Conjectures by Karen Olson, who's writing about this mathematician named Andre Vey. And she's interweaving in his story her own experiences majoring in math in college. And she mentions how one of her professors said that he hoped she would continue in graduate school in mathematics. And she thought maybe he just thought because she was a woman and that mathematics needed more women. And he said, no, that's not the reason. You're a writer, and we need more writers who can explain things. So there you have it.
Great to hear.
This is the book right here. It's by Karen Olson, The Vey Conjectures. It's, I think, a fairly new book. And so please do not consider yourself just a party crasher, a one-day wonder or one-day hit or something like that. You're here for good. So we want you to see more of you and see you be a continued member of the math community. Are there any questions? I don't see any in the chat. So
I've got a question. These are all very, very thought-provoking. Early on, Claire, you just made the comment, a change of heart leads to change of behavior. And I want to challenge that or discuss it with you a bit to fill it out a little bit, because I think it's quite often just the other way around. That it's change of behavior that leads to a change of heart. And someone mentioned that they were a Christian earlier and so on. I don't have all the beliefs, but I certainly find a lot of what Jesus of Nazareth said is kind of interesting. And he had a real interesting observation, at least that was recorded in the Gospels. He said, where a man's treasure is, there will his heart
will be.
And I realized how different that is from what you hear most people say. They say, oh, where your heart is, that's where your treasure will be. No. It's often our actions that leads to the change of heart. And it's really kind of optimistic, because it tells that you just dang do it, just like Nike, you just do it. And then the change of heart will come along. And I think that was part of what happened with Christopher. And I agree with you. I mean, there has to be a germ there. There has to be something to build on. But there's a synergistic thing where the change of action leads to a change of behavior. Would you agree with that? Did you see it yourself?
100%. And of course, you would turn this into some kind of formula. No, it's a synergistic thing, and he was as surprised as anyone, to find himself developing empathy, especially for himself, as a result of it. He thought he was just having mad fun with numbers. So the empathy came later as a result of the behavior. So I actually agree with you.
And would you find that in your son as well, that the change of behavior leads to change of heart?
I have 3 kids, and I'm still working on that, even though they're in their 30s.
Okay.
My brother has always loved mathematics, and I've always had him in the back of my head, but today has been like a deep dive into the wonders of it, and I am a absolutely bedazzled bystander.
Yeah, good.
Any other thoughts of anyone else who's here in the Zoom session? Claire, thank you so much again for joining us, sharing your thoughts and insights. It's amazing, really, what you've done, and how you can articulate it and express it in words and writing that you can share with the larger world, and what you bring to the mathematics community is invaluable. So thank you, and stay with us.
Thank you, Peter.